Hey friends, you've been asking me for a while to do videos on Industry 4.0, and it's actually been on my list for quite some time. But here's the catch. Half of you want to understand why there's a sudden resurgence in automation, like we've been doing it the same way since 1840, and the other half of you want me to explain that Industry 4.0 is a buzz term and people need to quit using it. Now, the truth is somewhere in the middle, because I hope with the first group of you, I can help you understand that this is more of an evolution, not a revolution. And for those who think that it is just a buzz term, we do need to work on telling our story, and hopefully this will help with that. Now, to get to the root of this, we need to talk about the OG Industrial Revolution. And for that, we are going to go to fellow YouTuber Steve Heimler.
Okay, before we get into how this revolution started, let's begin with a definition. The Industrial Revolution describes the process by which states transition from primarily agrarian economies to industrial economies. Or to put it in words you actually understand, this was the transition in which goods for sale went from being made by hand to being made by machine.
Now, he nailed it with the first part of that definition, but when he said, put it in words you actually understand, that's where the disconnect happens, and that's what I see written in books. And the issue is it leaves the average person thinking that machines have magically been making everything hands-free since the 1800s. You need to understand the point of view of the person making the statement, because notice I did not say Steve Heimler was wrong. He's going to help you pass your AP history exam, so go on over there and check that out. But why do we evaluate historic events? We are usually looking for changes over time in our social structures, in our economic structures, in our political structures. We're not looking to actually understand the evolution of manufacturing. Now, the Industrial Revolution was approximately 1760 to 1820 or 1840, but it wasn't until 30 or 40 years later that someone termed the coin Industrial Revolution, and it was by an economic historian, not someone in manufacturing. They were trying to understand the social and economic changes that rapidly happened in that short period of time. Now, let's talk about the difference between a revolution and an evolution. I am not a historian, but if I flip over to July on my calendar and look at the 4th day, it says Independence Day here in the United States. Now, I know there's some debate about the exact date, but for the most part, on that date in 1776, the United States said, we are now independent. That is a revolution. Now, industry did not get together on August 5th of 1762 and say, we, the people of the agrarian society, proclaim that we are no longer going to do that, and we are going to turn and become an industrial society, because that would have been a revolution. It was an evolution. But many factors over roughly 100 years collided to make significant social, economical, and yes, political changes to the world. And if you're an economist and you get up there and straight up say we had a social revolution or an economic revolution or a political revolution, well, you're going to be on the chopping block. So it's a lot easier to say, oh, it was the industrialists' fault. Now, going back to who coined the term, if you want to Google that, and you'll find out that one of the guys who maybe did it did have coffee with another guy that ended up causing a major revolution. So this was a world-changing time in history. But it wasn't a revolution for the people in manufacturing. Now, fast forward 200 years or so, and we have Industry 4.0, which was popularly used by Klaus Schwab in 2015. Now, he's the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. He is a smart man. He's both an engineer and an economist, but he used the phrase to highlight social and economical and political issues, not an instant change that happened in manufacturing. And even then, he says it's been going on since the late 90s, early 2000s. Well, that would have been 25 years ago. So yeah, we can even look back then and start to make some generalizations. Now, I'm going to walk us through some of the evolution of our industry, and we're going to zoom further out than the industrial evolution time period, because I want us to understand that humans reducing the work required to do a task is not something new. 4650 BC is the first evidence of copper tin, which is what bronze is made out of. And even then, there is no history book that is going to tell you 4650 BC was the beginning of the Bronze Age. And that's the issue with us trying to throw these exact dates on this Industry 4.0, 3.0, 2.0. So if you want to talk about a revolutionary time, this probably would be the one for manufacturing. We developed a ruler. We developed balance scales. We had developed a touchstone. Now, a touchstone was an early device to determine the hardness of metal. So we're beginning to really start gauging how hard our metal is. We developed the first dictionary. That way, we didn't have to remember all this stuff anymore. We could actually go and figure out, okay, I need to mix up this much copper and this much tin and this much human blood, and we'll have some good bronze. And then we developed the protractor, the water clock, and finally, and I think this one's important, 1500 BC, we developed the seed drill, because too many of you on the Industrial Revolution think that prior to it, we had people walking along putting every seed into the ground. No, we did have mechanized ways before it. 13th to 14th century, worm gear, cotton gin developed. Now, I know a lot of you are getting ready to say, wait, Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin. No, he improved the cotton gin. He did not invent it. It, again, was a slow evolution, us improving our processes. 1775 is the first one I'm going to bring in as our Industrial Revolution. That's when we get the screw cutting lathe. And arguably at that point, we could build almost anything that we could build today. We can do a lot better job at it now, but we could have enough time. We could have done it. And yes, I had to throw this in there because if I didn't, I know somebody would say something. 1793, Eli Whitney invented the modern cotton gin. 1804, we got the steam locomotive. 1842, and there were several of these during this era, but this was a major part of what made the Industrial Revolution happen is we invented superphosphate, which was the first man-made fertilizer. We also managed to extract some amazing fertilizers during that time. Now let's stop a second and let's talk about those dates that are kind of coming together at one time and talk about what that did from a societal and economic perspective. First, we ended up with major improvements to our agriculture. We had better fertilizer. We could grow more crops in a smaller space, and we had better mechanization, which did reduce our labor. Now, that did put people going off the farm and going into the cities. Also, we had the steam locomotive. This one allowed us to move supplies from town to town, but it also allowed towns that were not connected to the Atlantic or Pacific Ocean to suddenly start growing. That's where you see the explosion of places like Chicago happening. And with all that labor coming into these cities for the first time in, we'll call it developed country history, we had a large group of people that no longer had to worry about where they're going to get their food for tomorrow. Now, we have major food insecurity issues still worldwide, but in a developed country, it was probably the first time that the majority of people suddenly had more time to think about things besides what they're going to eat the next day. And this started to bring a rise of the middle class. So we have excess labor in these cities. We now have the ability to manufacture equipment. And now we have some people looking around like, my belly's full. What else can I go buy here? So what do you think of these videos, especially if you're not in manufacturing? What questions do you have about manufacturing? And don't worry, insiders, I am still here mainly to help you do the best job possible. But if we don't share our stories to the outside world, then they're only going to be able to get their information from the 6 o'clock news.